The following is a presentation of the Six Arrows Radio Network.
Today on the Workbench, building a portable HF radio case and SDR radios. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Workbench. I'm your host, George, KJ6VU.
And I'm Jeremy, KF7IJZ.
This episode of the Workbench is brought to you by Elecraft, makers of high-performance radios, amplifiers, and other great station accessories. Check them out at www.elecraft.com. And by Autodesk, the makers of Eagle PCB design tools, the software we use to design all of our Workbench build projects. For more info and your free copy of Eagle, go to www.autodesk.com/Eagle today.
Welcome to the Ham Radio 360 Workbench Podcast, your bi-weekly deep dive on maker and technical topics of interest to the radio amateur. Good evening, George.
Hey, Jeremy, how are you?
I am doing quite well. It's really weird. We're recording off cycle. It's a Monday.
Yeah, I'm not used to recording either on Monday or when it's light outside.
Or more specifically when it's a school night. So, yes, George and I are getting together earlier in the cycle this time because both of us are actually unavailable for our regularly scheduled recording time, which I got to admit, with the exception of when you were out of town, I think we've had a good run of keeping our schedule.
Yeah, I think we've hit like 26 out of 29 episodes have been always the right date.
Yep. So with that, we are getting together a little bit earlier than normal. This episode, of course, is still airing as normal. This just means we had to be extra cognizant about calling things out effectively over the next 2 weeks. So, George, tonight we're going to be spending a little bit of time focusing on ourselves.
Yes. Well, I've got so many projects. We could easily fill up a show with stuff that's sitting here aging on my workbench. I think you're in the same boat.
Yeah, except because of my crazy work schedule and other obligations, I think I have actually been more singularly focused on a topic. So it's pretty interesting. You came back from field day and are really, been hot and heavy on one particular topic we're going to deep dive into. And I've just been kind of slowly lumbering along, playing around with stuff that I picked up at Dayton this year from AirSpy. And so, when we ask the question about what's on each other's workbench, that's the topic of the show tonight is what are our summer workbench projects? And
boy, I think we actually have quite a few. I know you said you've narrowed it down to one big one, but you have your printer build. You've got other stuff in the hopper besides the even the AirSpy. But
yeah, but that's the only one I've really been able to incrementally put effort again. But before we get into those,
I didn't say I put any effort into all these other projects. I just say they're staring me down on the workbench. I'm accumulating the projects at a faster rate than I can work on them.
All right. Well, before we get into any of that, first of all, we want to remind folks that next Tuesday. Yes, when you are listening to this, the following Tuesday will be our regular Ham Radio 360 podcast. And following that on Thursday is our brand new Field Radio podcast.
Yeah, that's going to be really fun. It's great to hear John run with his podcast. I can't wait to hear more episodes. I think there'll be a lot of good learning coming out of that, both experiences and operational tips and all kinds of useful information, I think.
So if you guys have not yet subscribed to the Field Radio podcast, open your favorite podcast player, iTunes or Pocket Cast or whatever, and search for Field Radio. You can also find John on Twitter at Field Radio Pod. And if you go to hamradio360.com in the main nav, you will also see a Field Radio link in there, right up there next to the workbench. So make sure you check that out because, and if you haven't listened, John's entire premise is ham radio outside of the home, which I think is such a beautifully simple way of categorizing everything there is to do with portable field and adventure radio.
The timing is really right because with so many very good quality radios getting so tiny and with so many of us having either the opportunity to go out and operate in the field or forced to because we can't at home, I think it's really a great time to be focusing on that.
Absolutely. Plus, there's more and more exciting stuff, coming out that supports portable operation. And John also kind of will, over the time that he's airing, also get into some of the more emergency radio type aspects as well. So on top of that, we also have a contest ongoing. George, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we talked to our friends over at Power Film Solar. Those are the guys that make these awesome, lightweight, foldable, flexible solar panels. Think about a big piece of canvas cloth with a solar panel built into it. And these are used by hams. They're used by commercial and military customers as well. And we talked to the Power Film guys and asked them if they'd like to come on the show and talk about their technology. And we will do that when they're available in the next couple of weeks. But in the meantime, they have sent us a solar panel to review, and we'll be doing that in a future episode. And in the run-up to that, they've offered our listeners a free 30-watt solar panel to one lucky listener. So to enter the drawing for that 30-watt Power Film solar panel, go to www.powerfilmsolar.com/products/workbench. And once you get to that page, you just fill out your name and your call sign and your email address, and you'll go on the list, and they will draw one lucky listener to receive that 30-watt super portable, perfect for soda, field day, or any kind of portable ops solar panel.
And guys, I mean, as far as lightweight and with a lot of capabilities, these panels are awesome. As you guys may or may not know, I've been using Power Film products now for several years. I have successfully run 2 field days off of them this year. I ran a 3 alpha completely off of Power Film solar panels, and we were all QRP. Didn't even hardly touch our batteries. And I've done a 2 alpha off of it before, running a 100-watt radio turned down to 50 watts, and also a 20-watt UKITS kind of QRP-ish radio with great success. So again, that contest URL can be found at www.powerfilmsolar.com/products, plural, /workbench. And of course, we will have a link to that in the show notes. But yeah, go over there, put your information in for a chance to win. It is an awesome piece of kit. So I want to share something with folks that I don't think I've mentioned it a couple of times, but now the time is upon us. But I am going to have a booth at the upcoming Dayton Mini Maker Fair in Dayton, Ohio, at the Carillon Historical Park, August 5th and 6th. I will only be there the 5th, but the Maker Fair happens on the 5th and 6th. And what's cool is this year they are having an entire ham radio pavilion.
Wow. What all is going to be there?
So I know that they're looking for volunteers and doing everything from doing like crystal or FM radio kit building. I know that the Dayton Amateur Radio Association is going to be there. And here's something I have a little bit of inside information on. You know what's cool?
What's that?
They're going to be selling RTL SDR dongles for $5.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes.
Wow.
These would normally be like $20 to $25, but they have a large number of them available to basically sell to the public to get folks interested in starting to play around with radio at home, whether they're a ham or not. So that's pretty awesome.
Wow, that's definitely the price point where people are going to say, sure, yeah, I'll take one, whatever
for $5,
that is.
How can you go wrong? They're inviting a bunch of people who are in the middle of home build projects, and that could be everything from taking a Raspberry Pi to get a terminal up and running to folks constructing radio. So I would expect to see several folks there with homebrew. They're looking for folks to actually set up working stations, which that's one of the things that I hope to do, is have a working HF station with a portable antenna and probably my IC 7300 because it has the nice waterfall that's big and bright. And then I will probably also have my laptop with the AirSpy equipment out there to demonstrate VHF and above as far as software-defined receiving. So I think that'll be pretty cool.
That sounds really nice. So, what would you show for the SDR? I mean, is there a particular application, or just, hey, here's the FM band, here's aircraft, or what would you show?
Honestly, one of the best demonstrations that I have seen done and is probably using 2 dongles, so like an AirSpy and then an RTL SDR to actually get your computer to decode Project 25 like police traffic.
Can the AirSpy transmit, or is that strictly receive?
It is strictly receive.
So you'd be comping an APCO 25 signal off the air somewhere.
Yeah, so basically tuned to, say, like Dayton Municipal Radio.
Okay. Why do you need 2 to do that?
You need 1 to monitor. Well, actually, it depends. It works better with 2 because you use 1 to strictly monitor the control channel, and then 1 to monitor the bandwidth of where all the signals pop up. And then you can use software to, like Unitrunker, to control the tuning.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So it'll automatically figure out where to go and pop to that frequency and then decode it.
Yeah, basically, I mean, it follows the trunking. So, if I have time to get that up and running, then we'll do that. I mean, I definitely can set up the SDR, but I hopefully hope to have a station on the air and let people actually try to make some contacts or something. So the radio and a portable antenna and the tuner will hopefully be out there, and of course we'll have some information about the show. And so I'm excited about that. Also, I still have a bunch of ham study material that the folks gave me at Dayton to hand out to get people to online resources for licensing. And speaking of licensing, Dan Romanchik is actually, KB6NU is actually going to be there teaching a free one-day tech class on Sunday.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yep, and on top of that, the the DARA Laurel VE team will be offering testing after the class. So that's pretty awesome. And it's going to be free. So even if you don't take the class and you're interested in trying to get your license or to upgrade your license on Sunday, it sounds like for sure that'll be available. They may actually even have a Saturday class, but I don't have final word on that yet.
Hey, one other thought for you. You can get free literature from the league to hand out at events like this?
Can you?
You can. If this is a great tip for the listeners too. If you have a public event and you want to put out promotional collateral like glossy brochures about amateur radio, you can get them for free. So go to the ARRL website, go to the store, and search for probably brochure. Because every field day we show up to our field day site with a stack of handouts, and we usually get 25 or 50 of each of the handouts, and there's like 4 or 5 different ones. And one will be ham radio kind of in general, and another one will be like more techie, and another one will be more public service oriented. And for free, they're awesome, and it's great for the league. It's great for ham radio, and you have a nice professional handout. You could even stamp it with a local club's reference, like a website or contact info. So if you've got time before the event, you might want to take a look at that.
Well, that's cool. The Maker Faire overall, my family went last year. First of all, if you've never been to Carillon Park, it is an absolutely stunningly beautiful, well-maintained park with incredibly tall trees, with a lot of, growth. Everything is very shady in the good way, not the bad way. Last year, they had some other things set up. Like they had kind of a build area to introduce people to soldering, and they had these little kits. Everything from blinkies to more sophisticated gadgets that were available for sale. So it's an introduction to get people soldering. They have folks there doing fiber arts. They have folks there. We had a blacksmith last year, which looks like he'll be back. So it's a pretty cool, well-organized event. And in fact, we spoke with Eric Venandy, KG6NFJ, who is the Maker Faire organizer. And I want to say, first of all, thank you, Eric, because you have worked absolutely tirelessly to put this thing together with the other volunteers. Based on the communications I've gotten from you, we're expecting this thing to be much bigger than it even was last year. And I would really like to see this momentum to continue. It's a great day to be outside in a phenomenal park surrounded by a lot of passionate, techie people, and come get an exposure from everything from electronics. Of course, Dayton, you have Wright-Patterson Air Force Base there. So there's there were a lot of aerospace related projects and some really cool amateur rocketry stuff there last year. There were folks there that were building like legitimate rocket engines, like big rocket engines, not like amateur class, but like legit rocket engines. it just it was a really good way to spend a Saturday or a Sunday. So again, that'll be in Carillon Historical Park on Saturday and Sunday. Admission is the Maker Faire is free. You just have to pay the park admission, which is I think $8 for adults, $7 for seniors, and $5 for ages 13 to 17. Of course, the little ones get in free. And it runs on Saturday 9:30 to 5 p.m. and 11 to 4 on Sunday.
That sounds like a really fun event. And in a way, it might be more fun, should I say this, than the Bay Area Maker Faire, because it's a zoo. I mean, there's a zillion people that go to the Bay Area one. So it's kind of a huge happening, but it's also like a mob of people. So it might be a little easier to navigate your way around at a mini Maker Faire than at the big ones.
There's nobody driving fire-breathing robots at this one yet.
Yet.
We can aspire.
It's a matter of time.
Yes. But yeah, so if you're looking for more information, please check out their website at Dayton.makerfair, and that's fair ending in an E.net.
Awesome. That sounds like a load of fun. We'll look forward to a report when you get back.
I lied. Dayton.makerfair with an E.com. So ignore that first URL.
Yes, do that.
Look, they call it amateur radio for a reason. I am providing every bit of value that I get paid for.
You are a professional. So, Jeremy, what's haunting your workbench?
Well, George, I think that's a fantastic question, and I can't wait to hear what's haunting your workbench. But tonight, that's the focus of the show, is our summer workbench projects. I think let's face it, we're both adults. If we could go off to a maker summer camp or an amateur radio summer camp, I would totally do that.
Well, of course.
But we can't, so we have our workbench projects. So when we get back from the break, we will deep dive on answering the question of what's on our workbenches.
Sounds good. We'll be right back after this.
Elecraft is one of my top picks for high-performance HF radios. They make fantastic base station style radios, amplifiers, pan adapters, and other station accessories. They're also the designers of the KX3 and KX2, the ultimate portable HF radios. If you're thinking about SOTA, portable operating, or travel, you really need to be looking at Elecraft. Elecraft has some of the best designs in the industry, compact, high-performance, feature-rich designs. You're really going to love them. And Cale just got his KX2. So be checking out the Ham Radio 360 podcast and also the Facebook page and see what he's doing with his KX2 radio. The KX2 is my personal favorite for going portable. It's ultra small, 80 through 10 meters, sideband CW and data modes, and the thing runs 10 watts on the internal batteries. You'll love it. Check it out at elecraft.com.
So, George, I ask you what's on your workbench. In the last couple of episodes, you've had kind of a catalog of things. So let's get out of the way. What are the things that you are currently ignoring?
Okay. Briefly, the things I'm currently ignoring is my Whisper transmitter. I'm ignoring my HF SIG's BID X40. It's sitting in the box waiting to be wired up. And then I have some repair projects on the bench of radios that people have given me and asked me to fix them. And I don't have time to fix all my own radios, let alone someone else's. So it's just an accumulating pile. But the thing that's got most of my attention has been the search for the perfect go box for field day.
Yeah, let's you reference this in the field day after action. We talked about it. You brought it up again. You have kind of gone from mildly interested in trying to solve a problem in time for next field day to, I'm just going to say this, full on obsessed.
That's pretty close. Yeah.
I mean, you're like literally sending me, and you don't just send me pictures. You send me PowerPoint decks.
Man, I think in PowerPoint, I live in PowerPoint, so it's just easier for me to do that. But
beautiful slideware. Yes.
Well, I value your feedback, and I figure the more I can give you to check out what I'm doing, the better the quality of the feedback. So
indeed.
There we go.
So at that point, why don't you share with our listeners what's the problem that you came away from field day with?
Well, actually, multiple problems. I mentioned this in our after field day discussion, but it sort of boils down to this. I want to have a portable HF station to take to field day or to the park or some other application. And when I say portable, I don't mean travel/trail radio. That's a different category. So the trail radio is like the KX2 and the wire antenna, and everything fits in a little bag. That I don't mean that. That's a different class. This is something where we're going to be at the park for a day doing field day, but I don't want the thing to be too big and heavy. So what I've kind of eliminated from the past was doing a big 19-inch rack mount case of radios because it's just too heavy. Now, the other end of the spectrum is, well, you just take your radio and put it in a Pelican case, and when you get there, take it out and plug it in. The problem with that is that I always have a bunch of accessories, and the wiring is kind of a mess, and it looks like a jumble. And things tend to slide around on the plastic tables at field day, and I just find that irritating. The worst case for all this, and you could appreciate this as an owner also, is my KX3, because the KX3 plus the pan adapter plus the amplifier must have like 10 cables between all those boxes to make the whole system work. And I think when the KX3 first came out, it was completely unique in its quality for the size. I mean, it was just unbelievably good for such a small package. To add a pan adapter to that, to add the 100-watt amp to that was very compelling. Now, the problem is when you take those three pieces to field day and put them on the table, you got this massive wires to interconnect everything, and it's just kind of a pain. And it doesn't look very nice. So then I started thinking, well, what radio would be good for a portable radio for field day? And a friend of ours, John, who was at Dayton this year, he is on a little vacation and business trip. And while he was gone, he said, hey, do you want to borrow my 7300 and play around with it while I'm out? And well, of course, sure. So this is a long way around the barn, Jeremy, but kind of the backstory. So I get John's 7300 and I bring it home and plug it in, and I start playing around with it. And it's a really cool radio. I love it. It's beautiful mechanically. It's the display is gorgeous. It's got great features, nice user interface. I'm very impressed with the thing. And so I'm thinking, well, maybe this would be it, because I know you like the 7300. You just mentioned you're going to use one portable at the Maker Faire, right? So I totally get it. I could see where this would be an excellent choice, because compared to the KX3, well, it's all in one box, right? You've got the pan adapter, the radio, the amplifier. It's all integrated together. So that seems like a better way to go. So I put my my KX3 actually on the market to sell it. But side story, incidentally, I listed it on the KX. Well, yeah.
Yes. I'm speechless.
Well, okay. The other thing that's happening in parallel with this is it was my portable HF radio, but I picked up a KX2 last year, and for really portable, between the KX3 and the KX2, while the KX3 is a better radio, the KX2 is half the size. So for me, the KX2 is the ultimate portable radio. So that meant the KX3 sat around and did nothing. So that's kind of a problem. So here's this nice, fairly expensive radio sitting around. Mess of cables, just seems kind of suboptimum. So anyway, I decided to sell it, and I listed it on the KX3 email reflector. And within 5 minutes of putting it on there, I got multiple emails from people asking me why I'm selling it. And they didn't say, hey, I'd like to buy it. They said, why are you selling it? And I had to explain, I think the money is going to get maybe, a used K3 or something fancier for a portable radio. But anyway, so to get it ready, I hooked everything up and I was checking it out, and it occurred to me that this is actually a really nice radio. And the more I played with it, the more I talked myself out of selling it. So I completely forgot that idea of selling it. I stopped that and decided, okay, well, how am I going to make this really work? So this is where the portable station Go Kit kind of thing comes into play. So what's the fundamental problem?
Be clear, it's not, you have a KX2 for trail portable with a couple of batteries, a tiny transceiver, and some wire, right? This is more man portable.
Yeah, this is really like pull up in the parking lot at the park and lug your radio 100 feet to the picnic table. So you don't want it to be super heavy, but you want it to be, pretty capable. I mean, you don't have to really scrimp, like you're not counting the ounces, but you're certainly counting the pounds. So here's these 3 units, the radio, the pan adapter, the amplifier, and the milling cables. And, so what's the best way to do this? And I looked at, dozens and dozens of websites and YouTube videos, and looked at anybody and everybody who I could find that packaged up a KX3 somehow. I looked at what they did. And the conclusion I came to was that I wanted to build something that basically looks like a little shelf unit. So imagine a bottom piece that's the width of the radio and the pan adapter, with a shelf that's about the height of the radio and the pan adapter. So the idea would be to mount the radio and the pan adapter to the bottom and have all the cables neatly tucked in behind the radios, out of sight because it's underneath the upper shelf. And then the power amp would either be set on top, or the power amp may wind up being in its own box, maybe its own Pelican case where it's like screwed in place. So that still has to be worked out. But the basic radio is this like shelving unit, and it's 17 and a half inches wide plus the end plates, which is wide enough for the pan adapter and the radio, and a little bit of extra space for connectors, maybe a CW key. The shelf's about 4.5, 5 inches off the table, and the shelf part is 7.5 inches deep, and the base plate is 10 inches deep. So you have the shelf is shorter. So one of the things I found, I didn't really realize this until I played around with this a lot. Some of the really nice portable radios are mounted in let's say in a 19-inch rack panel, and by the nature of doing that, the display is vertical. So with the KX3, if the radio is vertical, the contrast on the display is not good. You can't really read it that well.
You can adjust that.
Yeah, you can, but you kind of really wanted to tip the radio towards you. It's a little bit easier to get to the buttons, because that way also the buttons are at a bit of an angle. You can touch them a little bit easier. And if you're operating CW, for instance, you might hit the spot button quite a bit, or you might be grabbing the bandwidth knob, and having it canted at a bit of an angle makes it more usable, in my opinion. So, okay, mounting it vertically in a rack box also it seemed kind of dim, but putting it on this sort of shelf thing lets me cant the radio upwards towards the operator, and I think it looks great. So that wound up being the prototype, and I put it together using half-inch birch ply, which you'd suggested, by the way, I think when we talked about this before.
Well, let me ask. So was it birch or Baltic birch?
Oh, good question. I don't recall if it was technically Baltic birch.
Did you buy it at like a large home store?
I did.
Then it is not Baltic birch.
Okay, well, it's the not Baltic flavor.
Okay, so for folks who don't know anything about woodworking, you can buy birch veneered plywood, and when you're buying it at like your Lowe's or Home Depot, you are buying it because it has a nice looking veneer that is easy to work and takes a stain. Baltic birch is a very popular material from which furniture is made in Europe. It is highly structural. It has a large number of plies. The veneer tends to be really thick, so you can actually sand it, and there are no filler. It is all hardwood used in the construction of the laminate. It is just like very, very structurally sound, high-end plywood.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's not that. It's the regular birch, super thin veneer. So it does have more plies than normal plywood. So if you look at the really nice. Plywood is like, I don't know, there's 10 different grades or whatever, but there's like construction grade that's like really crummy and knotty and all that. And then there's kind of like the better construction grade stuff. This is one notch above that. So it's got the half-inch piece has probably got, looks like 6 or 7 laminations plus the skin of the birch on the outside. And there's no gaps. Like when you cut it and look at the laminated segments, there's no like missing chunks out of that. So it's nice quality stuff, and it comes in at like Lowe's or Home Depot. It comes in 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch. I think the perfect size might actually be 3/8, but I went with 1/2 inch for the bottom plate, 1/2 inch for the sides, because I figured once that gets glued and screwed together, that's going to be very, very rigid and stout, and be very strong. And then for the shelf on the top, I used 1/4 inch, which I mainly did just to cut down on the weight and the bulky look. So 1/2 inch would have been okay on the top too, but I just went with the thinner 1/4. So I'll put out a link somewhere to maybe my webpage with the dimensions to this thing. But so the dimensions from the plan view looking down from the top is 17.5 wide, 10 inches deep, with the sides screwed to the ends of the bottom plate. So the whole thing is about 18.5 inches wide. The upper shelf, the back of the shelf is at the same point as the back of the bottom plate and comes forward 7.5 inches. So it stops 2.5 inches from the front of the bottom board. And that allows you to mount the KX3 and the PX3 in that front area and then cant it backwards so that those units touch the shelf and keep it from going backwards. One of the nice things about this is that it makes it look really clean. You don't see the cables. Like right now I'm looking at the PX3. That's got there's 5 cables plugged into the left side of the PX3. There's about 5 or 6 that'll be plugged into the KX3. There's a lot of cables. So all that stuff is hidden away. That winds up leaving about, I'd say a good 9+ inches to the back panel for other things inside the box. So you can put whatever you want. You can put in a battery. And normally, like we've talked about many times, I always prefer to put the battery in a separate case. But since this is a QRP radio, I'll probably just put a Bio-NO battery in the middle of this thing. I'm going to get some of these PowerWorks really nice round accessories like DC power switches and voltmeter and power pole connector and USB connector, and put those on the side so that you can either use the internal battery or plug in an external source into the power pole with a little voltmeter, and then for accessories it'll have a USB jack, so maybe for lights or charging your phone or tablet. And having the shelf on the top, this 7.5 by 17.5 inch shelf space is really cool because you can put a laptop up there, like a shorty laptop, like a little netbook sort of thing, or a lantern, or whatever, a notebook. So at field day, there's always something you can put up there, a fan, if nothing else, a clock, something. So when we log, like we use Hamlog for logging, so I could put a tablet sitting on top of the radio and put the Bluetooth keyboard in front of the radio, which is pretty slick. So right now I'm loving this thing. It's perfect. I haven't finished it, but I've gotten through the construction of the structure, and I just started to mount the radios, and I haven't mounted anything else yet.
All right. So questions.
Yeah.
So first of all, how did you make these cuts?
What I really wanted to do is go to our old lumberyard. We had this fabulous lumberyard called Southern Lumber here in San Jose, and it was huge, and they had all the usual wood, including a fine and exotic wood for real cabinet makers and woodworkers. And so I would buy the stuff there and go to the mill and just hand the guy a sheet of paper and say, make these cuts. And they would make these like perfect cuts. Well, they're gone. And so I wound up
probably because they gave away too many free cuts.
Probably. So I went to Lowe's and got this stuff. And so I'm just sitting in the driveway with my little folding work table and my battery operated circular saw, and I'm just making the cuts by hand.
Okay.
And when I'm doing that, I'm thinking, if I was really doing this to make it perfect, I would find some place where they could actually make these cuts for me. But I convinced myself that the first one is a prototype, so I wasn't getting too excited about that. So the cuts are close enough; they're not perfect, but good enough. And frankly, I'm not a mechanical engineer, so the first time I build something like this, there's always something you goof up. you realize the thing should have been an inch wider, or I should have made it half an inch deeper to put a connector here or something. So I didn't get too energized about it. So I tried to make it as nice as I could, but not go crazy.
Okay, so that's question 1. Question 2 is, what are you doing for joinery?
So very simple. So the side pieces are 7.5 inches deep and about 4.5 inches tall. And one of the reasons I like the 1/2 inch is because you can actually screw the wood together. So I don't know what the technical term is, but basically, imagine the bottom plate is horizontal, and then the side just abuts to the side of the bottom plate. So the sides are on the outside of the bottom plate, if you follow me. And so what I did was I drilled a pilot hole through the side into the bottom, and then I ran a bead of wood glue along the 2 pieces, put them together very carefully, and then drilled with another pilot drill bit with a countersunk head to give me that little conical depression in the outer side of the wood. And then I just put a wood screw into it. So the sides are held together with 2 wood screws on the bottom piece. And then on the top part, you can't do that with a 1/4 inch because it'll just splinter. It's too thin. So I got a little piece of hardwood. It's a long piece that's square, about a little more than a 1/2 inch. It might be a 3/4 inch square. And I cut that about 6 inches long. And so that's tucked up inside. So it basically joins the side to this piece and then the top to this piece on the inside, if you follow me.
Yeah, so basically that piece fills in the interior corner.
Correct.
Yeah.
Interior upper corner. That's right. And so then the top shelf rests on those 2 pieces. And if you add the thickness of the sidewall, 1/2 inch, plus the thickness of that piece, that's over an inch. So there's plenty to bite into to drill and connect it. And then the top shelf screws down into those 1/2 inch square pieces. And that would have been fine. I thought it looked okay. I wanted a slightly more finished look, so I just got some 1/2 inch L pine molding and just cut that to that 7.5 inch.
Spanish for pine?
El molding. That's right. It's the masculine form of the molding. So I just cut that to the 7.5 inch length, and so the top has a nice round to it. So I'm sure, if you're like a handy dandy woodworker, you'd look at this thing and think like, man, that's, I did that in high school. I could have done better than that. And I'm sure you could, but I'm not a fancy woodworker. I just kind of wanted to get it done. So half the point of all this was just to get the geometry right.
Okay. So that covers those things. And just so you know, when you put the 2 ends of wood together, I think that's called a butt joint and is the weakest of joints. But I'm not here to criticize your joinery techniques.
Well, I'm sure if I had the right tools and technique, I would have done something different. But basically anybody could do what I did. So that, yes. That's my excuse. I came down to the everyman, Jeremy. I hope you all appreciate this. Just so you little people could actually do this too.
But knowing you as I do, I'm really surprised you didn't tell me this project started with that you went out and bought a $3,200 54 inch saw stop table saw.
That's next.
So, I mean, that, I've seen pictures. You have the radio, you have the pan adapter. Are they just sitting in there?
Oh, yeah. Great question. So,
how do you have those affixed? Because, we've talked before. That's one of the biggest challenges about building something like this.
Totally. That was actually the hardest part, was figuring out how in the world to mount these radios in here, because why would you do that? And frankly, that was like the number one objective for this whole project, was to make the radios and the unit all one solid thing, so that you could pick it up with a handle and, carry it to the table and set it down, and you don't have to do anything. It's all, robust build, and, nothing's going to fall apart. Nothing has to get hooked up. So my first thought was, I'll use those mounting plates that Scott makes, the Sidekicks guy. So he makes these really cool accessories. He makes a plastic cover that pops over the front of the radio and the power or the pan adapter. He makes these side panels that extend forward, so if you roll the radio on its face, it doesn't squash the buttons. And anyway, he makes this. I guess it's a polycarbonate thing that snaps to the back of the radio, and it's got a 4-hole mount. We talked about that thing at the last episode.
Yes, so, an amps mount.
Yes, an amps mount. So I thought, well, perfect. So I got that, and that would work fine, but I didn't measure the size of the mount and the radio before I built the box. So I built the box with the radio in place. Then when I snapped these plastic holders on the back, it elevated the radio enough that it was just not quite right. And then I thought, well, how would I even mount this thing inside? I mean, it's not hard to do, but it was just not obvious how to make all that work. So I kind of put those aside, and I thought, okay, well, maybe I can get some strips of pine and make a little foot in the front, but then how does it anyway? So I tried a bunch of ideas, and none of them really panned out. And then it dawned on me, the perfect answer is the lowly L bracket. How would you use the lowly L bracket? Well, the way these chassis go together, there's 4 knurled screws that hold the back panel on the back of the radio and also on the back of the pan adapter. And the pair of screws that are in the back near the bottom of these 2 units, the screws come out all the way. They're about like a half an inch long. And I realized that I could just take a pair of L brackets, screw it to the board, and run those screws back through the L bracket into the radio. And that's what I did. And once I did that, I thought, wow, this is like perfect. And the way I did it was imagine you have the radio, and at the back bottom of the radio on the left and right side, the L bracket comes down and then flares out in either direction. So it's about a 3/4 inch L bracket. When you put the pan adapter next to it, now you got about 1.5 inches between the radio and the pan adapter, and that was a little bit too far apart. I wanted them closer together. Oh, rats, how am I going to do that? If I overlap it, it'll elevate it. That won't work. So then I realized that I could just flip them around and put the L's going from the screw down to the board and then in underneath the radio, not out to the side. So there's no flared L bracket. The L bracket is tucked under the radio, if you follow my description.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then the only tricky thing was, okay, how do I make the screw head short enough so that it doesn't clash with the chassis? Because the chassis can be pivoting, so the angle of the chassis is going to protrude down into the L bracket pretty close to the bracket itself. And I took a good look at it and realized if I use a countersunk wood screw, that it'll be short enough and it'll work fine. And it did. So I had to take some sheetrock screws and Dremel off half the screw to get it short enough to fit in the plywood. But it worked perfectly. And the nice thing about this is not only was it cheap and easy, but you can adjust the friction. You can tighten these screws as much as you want, and the thing's not going to move around. And if you ever want to take the unit apart, like take the radio out or take the pan adapter out, you just take out those 2 knurled screws and the thing just pops out. And I wouldn't do that normally, like, oh, every weekend I take the radio out of the box that way. I would never do that. But if a month from now I want to remove the radio to rewire something, I could do that. It's no big deal. 2 minutes and you're done. So again, the radio is held in place by the 2 bottom screws that are normally screwed into the chassis, and then they're tipped back so that the top of the radio and the top of the pan adapter touch the shelf. And I have the sidekicks brackets on there as well. So even if the top edge of the radio were to like go just slightly past the edge of the shelf, it would be stopped by the sidekicks rails. So the thing can't go backwards. So it's mounted at a perfect viewing angle. So it's great. So if you're sitting there at the table looking down at the radio, maybe a foot from you or a 1.5 feet from you where it normally would be, the front of the radio is looking right up at you at the right angle. So once I got to that point, I thought, wow, actually, this is pretty cool. I really like this. And it looks small. I mean, if you actually look, surprisingly, if you compare this like to an effects box. We've talked a lot about using 19-inch rack cases, and the shallow ones are 8 inches plus end panels, right? The roto-molded ones.
Yep.
So that 8 inches turns into about 14 inches by the time you add those things. If you get the normal effects boxes, the box is 14 inches, and you add another 6 inches of front and back, so now you're at 20. So those effects boxes, besides being heavy, get really big really quick. This thing is 10 inches deep on the bottom and 7.5 on the top, so it doesn't look massive. It looks like a little shelf. Now, the surprisingly good fortune, by the way, remember those rigid tool cases we talk about?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so the rigid case is they make several, and one of them that I really like is about 22 inches wide, about 13 inches deep, and about 6 or 7 inches tall. They're $30 at Home Depot, and this box, just by sheer luck, this unit fits in one of those cases perfectly.
Really?
Perfectly. It was a complete lucky happening, because the 10-inch depth plus another half an inch or so for the knobs and things slides down right into the case, and there's no slop back and forth. There's about an inch left and right, but back and forth there's no movement. So it's like it was designed to fit the case.
Huh.
Yeah, huh. And if you put foam, you pop out the plastic insert on the top of those rigid boxes, and you put in egg crate foam on the top.
Mm-hmm.
It'll hold it in place. And one of the things that I'm playing around with here is a wireless keyboard that'll plug into the PX3. And so the keyboard can sit on top of the shelf, and the whole thing goes in the rigid box and closes up.
And so to be clear about that keyboard you're using is just like a standard wireless 2.4 gigahertz, and it's not Bluetooth or anything like that.
That's right. And by the way, so there's a lot I learned in this process. I mean, I really learned a lot about what I liked and what I don't like about a portable radio thing setup. But the other thing that I learned, and this sounds really stupid, but I learned that you should really learn your radio. Because in the process of doing all this stuff, I started thinking I don't use all the features in my KX3. I mean, I've used it a bunch on sideband and CW, but I've really not used it in data modes very much. And I really haven't used any of the things like programming macros in the PX3. I've never used a keyboard on this thing. And so now that I have this thing built, I realized I've been missing out. I have not really fully explored what this radio can do. And this kind of goes all the way back to the beginning, where I was saying, I didn't want this because it's kind of a mess, and I really want a different radio. And once I figured out how to structure the packaging of this so it solved that problem, then all of a sudden I realized, wow, there's a lot of things this radio does that I've never used, and this is pretty cool. So, by the way, on the keyboard, so the pan adapter is really nice. You can look at the spectral display. You could look at the waterfall. You could have function key labels on the screen, and you could have decoded text and transmitted text, and you could decide which of those things you want to display. So, for instance, you can put the spectral display at the top half, and you could put the CW decoding or the RTTY or PSK at the bottom half. Well, there's a USB jack on the side of the PX3, and so I got this like $13 wireless keyboard. It's a Gearhead keyboard, model KB3750W, which came with a mouse. And I don't use the mouse, but the keyboard is small. It's not doesn't have the big 10 keypad and all that, so it's narrow. And you just take the USB receiver and pop it in the side of the PX3. And in text mode, I type on the keyboard, and the radio starts sending CW. This is awesome. So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to. I'm like dying to use this thing on PSK31, because the KX3 will receive and transmit PSK31, and I think I do it with just this keyboard and the PX3.
That's amazing.
It is, and it could, all along the radio would do that, but I'd never really messed with it. And the thing that really jazzes me about that is whenever I think about, let's say, this station or any operating PSK, I think, okay, well, I need my little laptop. okay, I usually have a laptop, so that's not a big problem. Then I need a way to plug the laptop in the radio and blah, 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 blah. Well, I just realized that I don't need that, because the terminal program that would be running on the laptop to do PSK31 or RTTY is built into the radio and display and keyboard with the PX3. So the more I play with this, the more I realize, well, this is actually pretty cool. So anyway, the journey started out being, I need to figure out a portable radio. I need to figure out how to repackage something. And it turned into, I should really enjoy the radio I've already got. This is pretty nice.
Well, the one thing you didn't cover is the amp.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to the amp yet. So, and that's another pickle to figure out what to do. So there's a couple of options for the amp. The amp is small enough that you could put the amp, you could set it next to the box. It would look really nice. You could put it on top even. It would look okay. And to go from the box to the amp takes three cables. It takes DC power, it takes RF, and it takes a Cat5 cable that carries a bunch of control signals. So that's not too bad. So if I use the amp on rare occasion, like go to field day, I might just leave the amp separate and plug it in as a separate box. So maybe store it in some foam in a Pelican case. The other idea would be to maybe build its own little kind of similar case. The part of the challenge with all this was I had been trying to figure out how to box up the radio and the pan adapter and the amp all in one case. And by the time you do all that, I realized that was bigger than any radio that I could otherwise imagine. And it's fairly heavy. And I still have a mess of wires between all this stuff. So I just wasn't really thrilled with that idea. Which is kind of why I was even thinking about selling this and getting a used K3, because used K3 is about the price of all this stuff without the pan adapter. But anyway, so we'll get to the amplifier at some point. I may just go with it being its own box, if you will.
Well, so, I mean that's cool. As we've talked about this before, I've never been a fan of wood for Go boxes. But the fact that you can transport it inside of that, the rigid case, that's pretty nice. I mean, that's got a handle on the top.
For sure. And I'm going to put a handle on the wood structure, this shelving unit. The flip side is you don't build a shelf unit thing like this. You build everything in a gator case kind of an approach, which I think from a professional point of view is awesome and it would be great, but everything gets so heavy then. So that just didn't seem like the right answer. So I'm going to run with this for a while and see how it goes. So, I would certainly not do this without a case to put it in, because if you drop this on the ground, you're going to mess up your stuff.
Right.
So I mean, this is not the equivalent of the gator case with the front and back
no
caps.
Doesn't sound that way at all.
No, but by the time you take this and drop it into a Pelican case or the rigid box, then that really solves the transportation problem and the making it a secure thing. So when you get to the site, you basically walk up with the rigid case, you pop it open like a suitcase, and you just pull this out and set it on the table, and you're off to the races. And the thing that it eliminates is all the overhead of all the cabling and all that stuff. So, this may or may not be the ultimate answer, but it's certainly at this point pretty appealing. And I could see a form factor like this, or maybe even the exact size, for the 2-meter sideband station, or I could certainly see something like this even for a 7300 or any other kind of all-in-one sort of radio.
Well, cool.
Because this, take the 7300. If you just have the radio and a mic, then you could argue, well, what do you need this for? Just put it in a Pelican case. But like when you were doing field day with your 7300, what accessories did you have plugged into the radio?
I had a tuner. I had an LDG AT100 Pro 2. I had the computer with just one USB cable, and then I had a Heil headset.
Okay, so let's throw one more thing in there.
And a power supply, obviously.
I'm
sorry, that was from the battery, yeah.
Okay, so and maybe a headphone splitter or something like that.
No.
Didn't do that. Okay.
No, and the reason being is because the Pile and the Behringer ones off Amazon, like the RF just gets into them.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
So here's the thought: if I had that set up, looking at this thing as I'm staring at it at the moment, I would build something like this, put in the 7300 in the antenna tuner, and maybe a couple of a switch in the DC voltmeter or something like that, because it provides a little protection for the gear, and all the interconnecting cables are all like tied together and kind of out of sight. And the top of this thing is essentially a shelf you can put stuff on. Like you could put on that little laptop that you got, the keyboard detaches from that because it's a tablet, right?
Yeah, it sure does.
So, will the keyboard run by itself without being plugged into something?
No, because it interfaces to the computer via pogo pins.
Okay, so let's say you had like a Bluetooth keyboard. You can pair a Bluetooth keyboard with that. So what you could do is take that laptop and stick it on top of this little shelf. It's only like 4.5 inches off the table, and then put your keyboard in front of you with your mic or paddle. So anyway, to me, that kind of a setup just looks really clean. It would actually make for a very nice home station, for that matter. Indeed. So anyway, that's kind of the long story, but that's what got me to this point here. I don't know that this is the final answer, but I'm liking it so far. And I'll go ahead and take some pictures and put this up. I'll probably put something on the Facebook, and when it's done, I'll put some pictures up somewhere on my website or someplace. So Jeremy, tell us about what's on your workbench now.
Proverbially. So things that I'm ignoring are still the build of my Ultibots 3D printer. Still only about halfway done with that guy. Figure that's going to turn into a fall project at this point. I've actually moved it from the kitchen table. The wife demanded. That's a lie. That makes my wife sound so terrible. We demanded a dining room again. So we did some rearranging, put the kids' playroom where the dining room was, and then vice versa, which actually uses the room intended to be a dining room as a dining room. It's worked out well. One of the things that I have not been neglecting, but part of the reason why I don't have a lot of other projects going on, is I have finally introduced my daughter to real Legos.
Oh boy, that's awesome!
Yeah,
I love Lego.
So we have built a space shuttle set, 2 Minecraft sets, and then in my closet waiting, I have that the Saturn V Apollo Lego Ideas kit. I have a TARDIS, I have the DeLorean Time Machine, and I have the Ghostbusters kits all waiting. What's cool is, as part of redecorating, we're going to put some shelving up and actually display these Lego sets in the dining room with our other sci-fi memorabilia. So that's exciting.
That's so cool. Yeah. My next door neighbor has a Lego shrine in their living room too. I should send you a picture.
Nice. Please do.
That's great. I will.
Yeah, because we have a lot of there are lightsabers and models of all of the Enterprises, and a really awesome 1/6 scale R2-D2, and just like a bunch of collectibles, because this is something my wife and I helped, or is part of the thing that we shared, when we first met, was this love of geeky sci-fi stuff. But that's what's in my dining room, not on my workbench. So over the last, honestly, since Dayton, haven't really had much opportunity to play radio except for field day, and have finally, it started with pulling out my AirSpy Mini software-defined radio receiver.
So can you refresh me exactly what the specs are for the AirSpy Mini?
Sure. Basically, it is 20, 24, 28, I don't remember, megahertz to 1.8 gigahertz. The AirSpy Mini is capable of receiving up to 6 megahertz of bandwidth and 12-bit ADC, so decent dynamic range. Yeah, I mean, that's the Mini. So this thing is basically all the capabilities of your $20 RTL SDR, but on steroids. A lot more capability. Sells for $99, available from our friends at airspy.us, which is actually where I bought mine at Dayton a couple years ago. I had one of the first one. Actually, I had the first one that Joe sold at Dayton. And I've had this thing, played around with it off and on, but really started enjoying just sitting there at night and flipping through the spectrum. So let me there's two pieces of this, right? Because obviously there's hardware, but then there's software involved in software-defined radio. And I want to focus on the AirSpy platform because that's what I've really been playing with a lot lately. That has literally got pulled into informing laptop decisions, as I have discussed in depth. So for me, it started with the AirSpy Mini. Now, there is another hardware receiver available from AirSpy called the AirSpy R2. This receiver is a little black box instead of a dongle, has a USB cable, and can receive up to 10 megahertz of bandwidth. Same specs overall as far as, again, I don't remember if it's 24 or 28 on the low end to 1.8 gigahertz, 12-bit ADC, so same most of the specs, pretty much everything is identical except for the total amount of bandwidth available on the unit. So as I've been playing with this, I've picked up some accessories, which just help. So one of the things about these radios, they have zero front end whatsoever. They get overloaded very easily because they are by their very nature a wideband receiver. There is no selectivity at all on the front end. So anything that you can do to keep strong signals out of these things is helpful, right? So along the way, I picked up a couple of filters. I picked up, correct me if I'm wrong. So basically, I have a filter that filters out the broadcast FM band. So from like 87 megahertz to 108, effectively. Mm-hmm. Which I guess technically that's a notch filter.
Well, usually they're called a band stop filter.
Okay, so that's a band stop filter. Thank you. That was the word I was looking for. But this thing is actually designed and manufactured by the gentleman who currently sells the current RTL-SDR.com dongles. They're available on eBay. I'm sorry, not eBay, but Amazon for about $15. Got a link to it in the show notes. And basically, it completely suppresses the FM broadcast band, which this was important when I started getting FM stations down at like 50 megahertz and 20 megahertz on my receiver, because clearly there was some imaging, going on with those strong signals getting in. So I picked that up. I also picked up a high pass filter that basically rolls off everything below like 2 megahertz to keep the strong AM stations out of the receiver. Both of them do have an insertion loss. I think if you use the two together, you'd be looking at about a 3 dB insertion loss. I generally run one or the other depending on what I'm doing. Now, of course, keeping those AM stations out probably is not as important, maybe, when you're not looking at HF. So another accessory that I have, also available from airspy.us, is something called the SpyVerter. And a SpyVerter basically allows your AirSpy or any other SDR dongle the ability to get 0 through 60 megahertz. So it's a transverter.
So it's a down converter, I guess. Or it's an up converter, because it's going to take the 0 to 60 spectrum and up convert it
to something that it can be seen by the SDR or the AirSpy. Yes.
Oh, nice.
That's not a transverter.
Well, transverter. The trans part means transmitter, so it's a
not transformer.
No, so it's a block converter. It's doing up conversion.
Okay.
So is there filtering then in that also, or is it just the up conversion mixing stuff?
Yeah. That I believe does have some filtering. See, now you're having me actually go look at the. Yes, there is a low pass filter on that. Basically, everything above. It lets through everything below 65 megahertz. Mm-hmm. But it's a fairly sensitive little front end, and they can be used, like I said, with the AirSpys. If you have a Hack RF1, which is another software-defined radio platform that is both a transmitter and receiver, that basically does 0 to 6 gigs. The little RTL SDRs it's compatible with, and what's cool is this thing has 3 features. First of all, it's incredibly low power. You power it using something called a bias T, which basically activates a 4.5 volt signal from a device and allows you to provide the bias needed to power the device. So the AirSpy, there's a little checkbox in the software that activates that voltage, and then the SpyVerter can run off that. The current generation, the V3s of the RTL SDRs, also have this bias T functionality built into them. So that's pretty cool. That's thing one. If you are using a receiver or radio that doesn't have that capability, you can also power it via just straight USB. So that's cool. And then finally, there's an input on the SpyVerter, just like on the full-size AirSpy R2, for injecting clock signals. So you can discipline the oscillators in the device with a more accurate frequency source. So, for instance, AirSpy.us sells a GPS disciplined oscillator that you can, you put the antenna on it, and it's programmable to set whatever you want. But a very common in amateur radio and in labs for that matter is a 10 megahertz sample, or signal source. So you can use this thing to provide an ultra stable, ultra precise clock signal into both radios, which just makes sure that you are tuning accurately.
I noticed that when I played with an SDR dongle a while ago, it seemed like the when I would set a frequency, it was off, and you'd have to go into a setting and put an offset to put it on channel. So it seems like having that kind of accurate frequency reference would be really necessary to make sure the thing is spot on the frequency you think it is.
So one of the things that's actually very nice about the AirSpy equipment is they have fairly high quality TCXO oscillators in them. Okay. So like you said,
way better than the cheesy $15 SDR dongle that I must have bought.
Yes. I mean, like in the software, which I'll talk about here in a minute, there is a PPM offset to basically account for how off-tuned it is. You can also put in real, in frequency offsets. But truthfully, they're fairly stable oscillators, but sometimes you need to set the reference. And in fact, both the AirSpy Mini and the AirSpy R2, I don't think you can do this with the original AirSpy, but I don't know for sure. There is a utility available in the tools section that actually allows you to adjust the reference frequency. So, for instance, my AirSpy Mini, because it was one of the first batches sold in the United States, it did not have any calibration data available for it. If you buy one from Joe at AirSpy.us, he actually calibrates these himself inside before shipping them off, so there's a calibration factor. I do not own a GPSDO, even though I really, really want one, just because I think accurate time is cool. So I actually sent him a note and said, hey, how can I calibrate this without, spending the money to buy a GPSDO? And he actually explained to me, he gave me several different techniques. He said, if you want, you can, attach the SpyVerter and throw out a long wire and tune to WWV on 10 megahertz. And that's a pretty common trick to use for tuning radios. But he explained if you do that, you're going to get the error of the oscillator inside the SpyVerter. So he actually shared with me, have you ever heard of an ATSC pilot frequency?
No.
Okay. Do you know what ATSC is?
Oh, what's ATSC?
ATSC is the standard in the United States for digital television.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So we used to have NTSC. Now it's ATSC. So he sent me a link to a paper, which I'm going to have to find, explaining this pilot frequency. But basically, pretty much every digital broadcast signal, television signal in the United States has one of these pilot frequencies. And what it is it is an ultra loud, I don't want to say high power because that may not, but there's the signal to noise ratio on it is ridiculous. Okay. And it allows consumer tuners to find the pilot quickly when searching through channels. And then, based on where it knows the pilot is, it knows what the rest of the disposition of the rest of the signal around it. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is, so these channels, and if you have a software defined radio, you can see these quite clearly, but it looks like there is, so I don't remember what the actual television channel is, but at 204 megahertz is the start of a channel. I think at 54 megahertz also might be the start of a channel, but you go up approximately 310 kilohertz above the left edge of the channel allocation. And you'll see there's this spike. It is incredibly narrow and incredibly stable. And so what he said is, go based on this paper, because the value is not actually 310. It's like 3099407, blah, blah, blah. And this paper actually goes out to 10 digits, decimal points, as far as the oddball frequency. But what I did is I went into the calibration tool. I typed in 204.30945 or however many decimal points, and it sat there. And after about 5 minutes, it came back and it said that the reference oscillator had to be adjusted by negative 0.8 ppm.
That's great.
Yeah, so I mean, it was fairly accurate out of the box. My AirSpy R2 that I ordered recently is like a 2.3 ppm offset. Still, I mean, that's nothing, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, so that was pretty cool. I'll make sure to put a link to this paper in the show notes. But yeah, so there were all of those. A couple of other things I picked up is because I wanted to play around with ADSB tracking. I bought a bandpass filter for the basically 1080 megahertz ADSB band, and it truly is a bandpass filter.
So the ADSB stuff is at what, 1 point? You said 1.08 gigs.
Yep, 1080 megahertz, and also at 978. And this is the airplane tracking. Kale did a fantastic episode with our friend Nick on ADSB tracking a couple episodes ago. We'll make sure to put a link to that in the show notes as well. But yeah, this filter basically filters everything out except for that portion of bandwidth, which really just improves the ability of your receiver to receive those signals.
So it seems like the biggest problem with SDRs is that they're very broad and there's generally not much in the way of filtering in front of them. So that must be really necessary just to keep a bunch of junk out of the front end.
Yes, I mean, it just overall, it keeps the ADC from being saturated. It improves the overall dynamic range and sensitivity for the thing that you're looking at. Is to, it's like anything else. If the cleaner the signal you can start with, the better off you are.
So what kind of antennas are you using on this?
Well, that's an interesting question. So, I mentioned my filters. I've mentioned the receivers that I have. But so what I've been doing for this is I actually purchased an antenna that when I saw Kale last fall at the Shelby Hamfest down in North Carolina, as my wife and I were getting ready to leave the Hamfest, I looked over and there was this little hatchback that had this absolutely adorable little disc cone antenna. And the guy who owned the car was standing there, and I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, "What antenna is that? It's really cool." He said, "That is a Diamond D220R portable disc cone, and it's basically meant to be a mobile disc cone. Compared to the full size like D130s that folks have seen, it really is tiny by comparison, and it's only available down to a male PL259 connector because it is designed to go into one of the trunk lip mounts available from Diamond, right?
I've seen those things before, and I always thought that is like the weirdest mobile end. I mean, I know what a disc cone looks like, and they look totally fine if you put them on a building, but putting it on a car looks pretty crazy because it's got the radials and everything. So did you put this at the house?
Yeah. So what I did is, a couple of caveats about it. So it's tiny, and the guy had it in his car, and he actually was doing exactly what I wanted to do. He put it on his car so that he could basically go out and war drive with an RTL SDR dongle and just use it as a wideband receive antenna. Mm-hmm. So I think it's rated 100 megahertz to 1.6 gigahertz on receive. And of course, it will match well on 2 meters, 440, 900, and 1.2, I believe. Mm-hmm. There's no gain or anything like that, but just for a general receive antenna, I've been pretty happy with it. In a pinch, I've used it and the Spyverter to get 40, or at least strong signals on 40, which you would never actually expect it to work. But so when I bought that from the local R&L here in Cincinnati, I also then went through the store and bought the shortest bulkhead connector I could find, and then they had some mounting plates with 5/8 inch holes through them so that you could pass bulkhead connectors, and they're the kind of mounts that have like the U-bolts for a clamp. Like it's really meant to be a mast mount. Bought that, put the bulkhead through it, screw the antenna on, and then mounted all of that to an old camera tripod that I have.
And then where'd you put that?
Well, currently that was in my bedroom and I was plugging it into my laptop every night, but I actually moved it out of my bedroom. And this is where some of the cool stuff comes in with the software. Okay. So let me hold that question for one moment, if you will. So the piece of software, if you have an RTL SDR, if you have an AirSpy, the piece of software that I highly recommend you start out with is called SDR Sharp. And the sharp is the little like pound sign, like music sharp. That mimics, for those of you who are, have a development background, that mimics, Microsoft had C# as a programming language, okay, and .NET. So this is a Windows-only suite of applications, but it is phenomenally powerful software for seeing the spectrum around you, and it has a lot of built-in decoders as far as like FM, AM, sideband, CW, etc. There are some plugins to be able to do additional functionality, but there is an entire plugin ecosystem, and there's documentation on creating your own plugins if you're a developer and we're interested in doing that. But the software at a high level, again, SDR Sharp gives you a waterfall display of the spectrum. It allows you to manipulate some settings on the dongle you're using, including like the preamp and gain settings, the bandwidth. So in the case of the two RSpy devices, the big RSpy gives you two options, 10 megahertz or 2.5. The AirSpy Mini gives you two options of 6 megahertz or 3 megahertz. You can set that in there. You can set all kinds of audio options and recording options, both of the IQ data coming out of the dongle all the way to the baseband audio. But there's a lot of capability in that individual application. I won't deep dive into it because there's a million people who've done YouTube videos. There's a really awesome quick start guide available actually at airspy.com, which I want to point out, airspy.us is the United States distributor for AirSpy products. Airspy.com is the homepage of the company that makes the AirSpy hardware, as well as develops and supports the SDR Sharp software to go with the AirSpy hardware. Cool thing about all this, though, is a completely free download, but it's not just the SDR interface with the waterfall. It's actually a suite of utilities, and that's what I've been spending the majority of my time actually playing with here for the last couple of weeks, are the other tools that come with SDR Sharp.
I didn't even know there were other tools. I've loaded SDR Sharp and played with it with my cheap USB dongle, but I didn't realize there's other stuff. Like what else can you do?
So inside of the package itself, there are, I won't try to give a count. I will just, I'll just go down the list. So when you download SDR Sharp for free, so you get SDR Sharp, that's check one. You get that calibration utility that I mentioned that lets you set the offset for the AirSpy R2 or the AirSpy Mini. You get a tool called ADS-B Spy. And what's cool about ADS-B Spy is it is a little tiny box on Windows. You plug your dongle in. Hopefully you plug the filter in for the 1080 frequency. You start this application up, and it basically maxes out the gain. And it's capable of receiving ADS-B traffic and decoding it, and then encoding it in such a way that the information can be passed off to another application. So this little utility just runs. Really, the only thing it visually shows you is the received signal strength indicator for the signals it's receiving, and also how many airplanes it has received data from in a certain particular time of frame sets. So the cool thing about this app is it's designed to integrate with other software. So there are mapping applications you can point at it, which I'll cover here in a little bit, but it is basically to provide a host capability of your RTL SDR available both locally on the machine or even over the network.
So like what sort of application? It's okay if once you bring it up and you now you can see the aircraft. Is there something you could do with that, or is it like, well, that's pretty cool, you can actually see that, and then you're sort of done?
So there are, as Nick mentioned in the ADSB episode, there are several different providers that they have ways that you can use this hardware to send the data to them for like commercial websites like FlightAware. Okay. As far as running the server locally, it's pretty much, I can see it on a map and it's cool, or there are ways to forward that information onto different services. Again, so far everything I'm talking about is Windows only. As far as the ADSB thing, there actually is also a component for 32-bit ARM boards, such as the Raspberry Pi or the Odroid. So if you wanted to, you could take a Raspberry Pi, plug in an AirSpy into it, run this software, connect it to your network, throw it up in an attic or something out of the way, and then you could stream that data to web providers like FlightAware, or you could stream it internally to your own network to be done with, like with the mapping application I'm going to talk about here in a little bit, etc.
Could you stream it, just stream the audio, not the IQ data per se, but just like, let's say I want to listen to my repeater while I'm out of town. Could you just park it on your repeater frequency, put it in FM mode, and just stream the audio to you? I guess you could.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, because this brings me to the next utility included in the package, which is a tool called Spy Server.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
Yes. So Spy Server is pretty cool. This is the thing that I played with most recently. So you asked me, where did I have that antenna? So as of tonight, I moved the antenna into the room that will eventually be my office when I move upstairs. And so that room is basically has my unbuilt 3D printer in it, some boxes, and nothing else. So up there, I have like an ancient 5-year-old laptop that used to be my ham laptop, running Spy Server with an AirSpy R2 plugged into it. And then that's connected to the Discone mounted on the tripod I mentioned earlier. So what's super cool about this is if you wanted to, you could expose that over the internet. On my local network, obviously, it's a lot easier. But earlier this evening, I was downstairs at my computer in my office, which has no physical network connection upstairs and certainly no physical connection to that AirSpy. And I was able to run SDR Sharp on the machine downstairs, tell it that I want to connect to an instance of Spy Server, put in the IP address, and that was it. I was then getting access to the hardware of the network. And what's cool about the way they implemented this is the initial version of the software. The software, like Spy Server, would stream the raw IQ data. Well, if you are doing 10 mega samples at 12 bits per sample, that ended up being something like a 40 or 50 or 60 megabit connection. In other words, way more than you're reliably going to be doing over Wi-Fi, right? Mm-hmm. Like something that really requires a robust network to be able to handle that much traffic, and forget about streaming that over the internet. So that was version 1 of the software. When they realized the need for efficiency, what they did is they already had the code written to do this, but that what they do is instead of streaming the raw IQ data, the Spy Server software processes the input of the AirSpy. It decodes the FFT waterfall data and any raw audio if you are tuned to a frequency, and it sends the drawn FFT and the audio stream, which only ends up being like 128 kilobits per second, much less bandwidth needed. There's all kinds of configuration options. What's cool is both of the AirSpy dongles support a mode called decimation, which if you listen to our Dayton episode, Mike Osman, the inventor of the Hack RF1, reminded us that decimation is when you trade total bandwidth. So in the case of the Hack RF1, he has 20 megahertz of bandwidth, the AirSpy has 10, but you trade bandwidth to get additional dynamic range. In fact, I think he told us, I think it was for every bit every time you decimate or split in half the sampling rate, you get like an extra 3 or 6 dB in gain. I can't remember what it was, but so for some weak signals around here, like distant repeaters, like 440 repeaters has probably been one of the more fun things I have found. I will turn decimation on and say, instead of doing 8 megahertz of bandwidth, take me down to 1, and you will see the noise floor in your signal drop. So
yeah. So, well, if you're that's a good point. So in a case like a lot of the ham stuff, the actual frequency bands are relatively small compared to some commercial data applications, and even narrower down to our channelized modes are really, really narrow. So yeah, I would think you could really take advantage of that.
And what's cool is in the software, I don't have to worry about setting decimation separate of the bandwidth. When you're connected to Spy Server and using AirSpy equipment, it just shows you, like, do you want to do 8 megahertz, 6 megahertz, 8, 4, 2, 1, 500, 250, 125, etc. Right? Mm-hmm. So, that was pretty cool. There are configuration items as far as how much FFT data or fast Fourier transform data to send over the network. I left everything set at defaults. I would actually probably turn the resolution of the waterfall data up by 1 notch, which would effectively double the resolution. But yeah, to your point about could I monitor the repeater? Yeah, you could throw one of the $20 RTL SDR dongles, run Spy Server, just port that over the internet, and even you can set up options in the configuration file to limit the bandwidth further. And you could basically let that sit out there, and as long as you had some type of a mobile client, or specifically, as long as you had SDR Sharp on your remote machine, you'd be able to connect and monitor the repeater.
And you can completely control it remotely.
Yeah, pretty much. That's and again, that's probably I think more specific to the AirSpy hardware than the generic RTL SDR, because some of those options aren't even available with like RTL SDR. So, but yeah, you can control it all remotely. Like, it is pretty cool.
And it sounds like it wasn't that terribly hard to get that set up.
No, it took it took longer to run from the room upstairs downstairs to my office than it did actually set it up. Because basically I looked at the configuration file just to see if there was anything I wanted to set. And you can set things like default tuned frequency and stuff like that. There was nothing I wanted to do. So I basically, started it, came downstairs, connected to it, and then played with it. And it was really responsive and fast and a lot of fun. So what's also cool about the Spy Server software is it is also available for, I'll call it big boy Linux. So x64, x86, like Intel based Linux. But it is also, there is a version of it available for the Raspberry Pi. Now, granted, remember, the Raspberry Pi is not going to be able to work with the dongle doing 10 mega samples worth of bandwidth, right? 10 megahertz worth of bandwidth. Like, that's just too much data for the Raspberry Pi bus to handle. But if you flip the mini down to 3 megahertz, or you flip the full size down to 2.5, that works just fine.
And that all presumes that you're trying to look at a chunk of spectrum. If you're just listening to a narrowband channel, no problem.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you think about using it like a conventional receiver, mm-hmm. that's really fine. I think that the limitation there really is just if you want to look at the spectrum, you have a limit of how many megs of bandwidth you can see simultaneously. But if you're going to dial into like we're saying the repeater or whatever single channel, then or even a band of like the repeater frequencies, it's 2 megs, max on 2 meters for the most part.
Yep,
2.5 megs.
Now, the last thing that I think is pretty cool, and Barrick would probably get a kick out of this, is there is another...
An antenna analyzer built in?
Sort of. There is the utility built in called Spectrum Spy. And what Spectrum Spy is basically a poor man's uncalibrated spectrum analyzer. Spectrum Spy is basically just control software that has a slower waterfall, but you set a center frequency and a bandwidth, and the software takes care of. So let's say you wanted to look at 100 to 200 megahertz simultaneously. Well, with the AirSpy, you only get 10 megahertz of bandwidth, so obviously you couldn't do that in sequence. But the software very quickly tunes, say just pretend, from like 100 to 110, and takes a snapshot and draws it. Does 110 to 120, takes a snapshot and draws it. And the screen basically refreshes by changing the tuning and collecting the data to give you a series of samples to view on the scope.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and again, it's all free.
A lot of times when we think about the kind of test equipment we need as hams, we don't really need precision measurement instruments. So a lot of times we just need an indication of whether or not something's working or not, or some relative signal, this is bigger than that signal, or this is noisy or not. So that could be super useful.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the best examples is, you probably want to buy an inline pad, a frequency pad, a signal pad. So something that would knock, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 dB off the signal going in. But if you were curious about how clean the signal coming out of your Baofeng is, you could put in, say, a 30 or 40 dB pad in line with the receiver, key up, and you could actually see the spurs.
Well, and if you want a broadband noise source, there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
You got one with your HD right away.
But, similar, Barrick was talking about using this stuff with an inexpensive directional coupler and a Chinese broadband noise source to basically simulate a poor man's analyzer. Mm-hmm. And you could do that here too. I think the overall, like the capability and the tools that you get, especially for the price of free, are amazing. The hardware to get started with this for a really high quality receiver is affordable at $99 for the AirSpy Mini or $169 for the full size AirSpy. They are also currently working on a third receiver dongle called the AirSpy HF Plus, which will basically do, I think it's 0 to 30 megahertz. But the receiver is designed specifically for HF as an all-in-one unit, so there's a lot of attention paid to the quality of the received signal on HF. And then I think it'll do 60 to 260 megahertz receive, so you can get VHF and the weather bands in there as well. That's not yet available. It's a little bit different total architecture from the receivers they have now because, again, its focus is as a standalone integrated HF receiver. But yeah. So check out the software at airspy.com and check out the hardware from our friends at airspy.us.
Sounds like it'd be a great thing to take on a trip too, because it's so tiny.
It's so tiny, and it is literally just a lot of fun to me to sit there and like dial through the bands and just see what's going on. I mean, I've discovered a lot of interesting stuff this way. And there's even opportunities, it's beyond the scope of this episode, but you can also use these dongles and an SDR dongle to basically receive P25 public safety transmissions. Like listening, basically using it as a very inexpensive police scanner with software that is effectively free but requires a $20 donation.
Wow, it's really capable then.
Oh, yeah. And I love the hardware. I mean, overall, a couple other things I picked up. I picked up a low noise amplifier, which can provide, I think, up to 40 dB of gain. But of course, when you use that, the noise floor increases by a commensurate amount. But that's been a pretty cool tool to have as well. As far as, again, when I'm looking for like weak indications of distant repeaters. So yeah. That's what's been on my workbench.
That's very awesome. I really haven't gotten that much into it. I had this cheap RTL SDR dongle, plugged it in. That was kind of cool, but the noise floor was very high, and there were birdies and stuff. So it's great for almost no money just to jump in and play with something. So I think that's a great first step. But I could see where you'd want something a little bit better quality pretty quick.
Yep. And if, for instance, if you're a ham and let's say you are curious about whether or not you want to get into DMR, but you don't own a DMR radio, so you have no way of monitoring it. You could technically use these AirSpy devices along with a piece of software called DSD Plus to basically receive DMR or some of the P25 restricted, or restricted is the wrong word, but complex encoding scheme stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, really cool.
Now, are there decoders for D-Star or System Fusion as well?
Not built into the unit, no, because or not built into the software. So technically, the DSD software can, I believe. Well, actually, I don't know if it supports Fusion yet or not, because I know it can support the vocoder used in Fusion, but it's the structuring of the packets. So like the packet shape and approach, there is an issue, but it definitely can support P25 DMR, because those it has those built in. D-Star does work with an older application just called DSD, not necessarily DSD Plus. DSD Plus can work, I believe, but not reliably. Whereas the original root software called DSD did work reliably on D-Star.
So I know that there's GNU radio modules for some of those digital modes used in ham radio. I'm pretty sure D-Star code is out there somewhere, but I just don't know if the other stuff has been done yet. So I think one of the other interesting aspects of this whole SDR thing is it's not like here's the hardware and here's the one piece of software that comes with it to use it. That hardware is the target for several different software environments. So the Power SDR with the HF radios, I don't know if it's applicable to VHF, is the one that's used mostly for HF gear. Mm-hmm. The whole GNU radio suite and zillions of applications people have written in GNU, et cetera, et cetera. So in a way, you have this kind of universal reprogrammable piece of hardware. And that really leaves open lots and lots of applications that could be developed downstream that aren't even understood today.
And one other application for me is, talking about performance and trying to keep out strong signals, and et cetera. So I was interested in trying to find some small footprint bandpass filters. So if I wanted to say only listen to 20, mm-hmm. I could basically these are all pre-selectors, right? I could pre-select just that which I wanted to see. But what's kind of cool is with the wideband noise source and a directional coupler, you can kind of get an idea of the performance of a filter that you built. Mm-hmm. So lots of cool applications, especially, again, the software is free. The quality dongle starts at $99. To me, it's certainly on my list of most fun you can have in ham radio for $100.
Well, there's not that much you could do for $100. I mean, you can buy an HT, but this is really kind of also brings in an HF radio with the inverter or the converter, mm-hmm. and as well as a VHF, UHF radio, amateur and commercial, and all kinds of things. So mm-hmm. in a way, it kind of replaces lots of older, more expensive receivers. Now, of course, those had all the front end filtering and whatnot, but for like a tenth of the price, it's pretty astounding what you could do.
Yes, it is. So yeah, that's been what I've been playing around with, having a lot of fun with, and continue to learn more about it every single day.
Well, cool. Someday I'm going to get my AirSpy and play with it, so you could by then hopefully have figured this all out, so that you could just tell me what to buy and what to do.
Outstanding.
Sounds good. We'll be back in a minute after this.
This episode of The Workbench is brought to you by Autodesk Eagle PCB Design Tools. All of our projects we're doing on The Workbench use Eagle. It's great for schematic capture and board layout. You can easily generate all of the output files necessary to manufacture a circuit board. And whether you're building one board or 100 boards for your friends, use Eagle tools because they have really excellent support. They've got a great library of available components. It's widely used amongst the maker and the professional board design tool. You'll enjoy using the tools, and there's a lot of great new features. Check it out at autodesk.com/eagle, and you could download a free copy of the PCB design tool today and get started doing your project.
Well, George, I think that'll about wrap it up this week for the Ham Radio 360 Workbench podcast. For more information about our podcast, the Ham Radio 360 show, or the new Field Radio podcast, please visit us online at www.hamradio360.com.
And you can follow me on Twitter at KJ6VU or email workbench@hamradio360.com.
On Twitter, I am at KF7IJZ. Don't forget to submit an entry for your chance to win a PowerFilm 30-watt foldable panel by visiting www.powerfilmsolar.com/products, plural, /workbench. 73. Hold on, because I am never prepared. Welcome into the ham radio. No, that's Kale's line. He says, welcome in. All right. Welcome to the Ham Radio 360 Workbench Podcast, your deep dive. Nope. Beep.
Long week, huh?
Yes, today has been a very long week. All right.